The clock starts at the precise moment the salt water turns to concrete. September 12, 1846. The location is the Victoria Strait, just off King William Island. The temperature plummets to -20 degrees Celsius, and the molecular structure of the ocean locks into place. This is not a weather event. It is the closing of a prison door. For the crews of the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, time has just shifted from a linear progression of naval exploration to a physiological countdown. There are 129 men on board. They are the pride of the Royal Navy, equipped with the most advanced technology the Victorian era can muster, including steam engines and 3 years' worth of preserved food. But as the ice grips the hulls, groaning like a dying animal, the technology becomes irrelevant. The timeline of their survival is no longer measured in longitude or latitude. It is measured in calories, body heat, and the slow, agonizing degradation of the human mind. The Arctic is not a landscape. It is a biological weapon designed to dismantle the human machine. Consider the environment as a pathogen. Its primary method of attack is sensory deprivation. When the sun sets for the winter, it does not rise again for months. The darkness is total. It is a heavy physical weight that presses against the optic nerve. The men are trapped in the wooden bellies of their ships, breathing recycled air that reeks of coal smoke, unwashed wool, and damp rot. Outside, the wind chill drops the effective temperature to levels where exposed skin freezes in seconds. The cold seeks out the weakest points in the ship's armor, the nail heads, the portholes, the seams. Inside the hull, condensation freezes on the walls. The men are living inside a cryonic chamber that is slowly failing. Their biological rhythms, governed by the sun, begin to drift. Sleep cycles shatter. The brain, starved of visual stimuli, begins to eat itself. For the first winter, discipline holds the line. These are British sailors. They run drills, they maintain the engines. They pretend that the ice is temporary. But the ice is a living, shifting entity. It exerts millions of tons of pressure against the oak ribs of the Terror and the Erebus. The sound is deafening, a constant screaming of timber being crushed, day and night. It is psychological warfare. The men cannot sleep because the ship sounds like it is being chewed apart. And in a way, it is. The Arctic weapon is patient. It waits for the summer of 1847. This is the critical juncture in the timeline. The sun returns, the temperature rises slightly. The men wait for the release, for the leads to open in the ice so they can sail toward the Pacific. But the summer of 1847 is a lie. The temperature never rises enough. The ice does not melt, it thickens. The trap is sealed. This is the moment the timeline shifts from an expedition to a siege. The realization hits the officers first, then trickles down to the lower decks. They are not going anywhere. The 3 years of food supplies are now a finite clock ticking down to starvation. But the cold is not the only killer on these ships. There is a traitor in the hold, a silent, microscopic assassin that has been ingested by the crew since the day they left England. We need to look at the food. Specifically, the 8,000 tins of preserved meat, soup, and vegetables supplied by Stephen Goldner, the lowest bidder. To seal these tins quickly, the manufacturers used lead solder. They were careless. The solder dripped down the inside of the cans, mixing with the soup, marinating the meat. Every meal is a dose of heavy metal neurotoxin. Stop. We need to break the timeline here. Forget the cold for a second. We need to talk about the heavy metal hallucination. Lead is a mimic. It enters the bloodstream and pretends to be calcium. The body, desperate for nutrients, welcomes it. It absorbs the lead into the bones, the teeth, and most critically, the soft tissue of the brain. At high concentrations, lead poisoning is not just a physical ailment. It is a psychological horror story. It starts with the gums, a thin blue line appearing just above the teeth. Then comes the abdominal pain, the painter's colic, twisting the gut into knots. But the real damage is happening in the neural pathways. Lead destroys the myelin sheaths that insulate nerves. The electrical signals in the brain begin to misfire. Imagine the interior of the HMS Terror in the winter of 1848. It is pitch black. The cold is absolute, and the men are losing their minds. This is not cabin fever. This is chemical-induced psychosis. Paranoia sets in. The man sleeping in the hammock next to you is no longer your comrade. He is a shadowy threat. Orders from officers stop making sense. The cognitive decline is sharp and terrifying. They are aggressive, confused, and erratic. They are suffering from headaches that feel like the skull is splitting open. The silence of the Arctic is filled with auditory hallucinations, voices in the wind, screams in the hold. The timeline has fractured. Reality is dissolving. The men are not just freezing to death, they are being gaslit by their own blood. By April 1848, the ships have been frozen for 19 months. Sir John Franklin is dead. 9 officers and 15 men have died, an incredibly high casualty rate for a crew that hasn't seemingly done anything but sit in the ice. Captain Crozier takes command. He looks at the remaining 105 men. They are gaunt, their gums are blue, their eyes are wild with lead madness and scurvy. He makes the decision to abandon the ships. This is the death sentence. They plan to walk south, toward the Back River, hundreds of miles away across the most hostile terrain on Earth. They unload the lifeboats. They pack them with supplies. And this is where the lead poisoning reveals its full, absurd tragedy. When archaeologists found the trail of the Franklin men, they found the sledges. These men were dragging boats that weighed nearly a ton over jagged ice ridges. And what did they pack? Did they pack extra food? Did they pack survival gear? No. They packed silver cutlery, they packed heavy mahogany writing desks, they packed button polish, they packed books. One boat contained slippers and silk handkerchiefs. These are not the choices of rational survivalists. These are the choices of brains riddled with heavy metal. They were clinging to the symbols of Victorian civilization, dragging the heavy anchors of their past across the ice, burning calories they did not have to transport garbage they did not need. The timeline becomes a slow-motion tragedy of absurdity. The march south is a horror show. The caloric deficit is impossible to overcome. A man hauling a sledge in those conditions needs 6,000 calories a day. They are eating perhaps half that, and what they are eating is poison. One by one, they drop. The column stretches out, a trail of bodies marking the path to nowhere. The Arctic weapon moves in for the kill. As the men weaken, the cold shuts down their peripheral circulation. Fingers and toes turn black and snap off. The scurvy reopens old wounds. Scars from childhood injuries tear open as the collagen in their bodies dissolves. They are literally falling apart. And then the final taboo is broken. The timeline reaches its darkest point. The survivors, starving and delirious, look at the dead. They do not see friends. They see meat. The Inuit oral histories tell of this. They saw the agluka, the strangers, stumbling through the snow, black-faced and terrifying. Later, forensic analysis of the bones found on King William Island confirmed the story. Cut marks on the femurs, skulls cracked open to access the brains, pot polishing on the ends of bones, indicating they were boiled in kettles. The pride of the Royal Navy, the most advanced expedition in history, reduced to the primal, desperate consumption of each other. The lead, the cold, and the darkness stripped away 2,000 years of civilization in 24 months. The last men likely died looking at the water. Some made it to the mainland, to a place now called Starvation Cove. They were waiting for the ice to melt, waiting for game that never came. The timeline ends not with a rescue, but with silence. The wind buried them. The snow covered the silver cutlery and the gnawed bones. The ships, the Erebus and the Terror, sank into the crushing depths, preserving the evidence of the tragedy in the freezing dark. 129 men entered the ice. 0 came out. The Arctic didn't just kill them, it erased them, metabolized them, and left only a riddle of madness and heavy metal. We are still finding their bones today, bleaching in the midnight sun, telling the story of how the ice won. The technology failed. The discipline failed. The biology failed. It is a reminder that civilization is a thin veneer, easily cracked by a few degrees of temperature and a few grams of lead. My question to you is this: if you were in that line, dragging a ton of useless silver across the ice, knowing the end was coming, would you have kept walking, or would you have sat down and let the cold take you? Let me know in the comments.